Part 77. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 761. Sir, this matter is all my fault. Please spare my life, please forgive me. Lin Yu slowly walked towards Huang Mao step by step. The indifferent smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, his expression suddenly turned cold, and there was a hint of murderous intention in his body. Spare your life? Why should I spare your life? If I guessed correctly, the little action just now was also made by you. In other words, the reason why this guy came back is entirely because you brought him here, right? No. Lin Yu's expression suddenly turned cold, and then he took a step forward. The indifferent murderous aura on his body became more and more obvious, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became even brighter. After the guy heard what Lin Yu said, he was stunned for a moment, and then he took several steps back and then managed to stabilize his body. Sir, please listen to me. This matter is not what you imagined. At this time, the man hadn't finished speaking. Lin Yu just raised his hand gently, and then the man was lifted up little by his neck. At this moment, he could only feel his lungs. The air in his body seemed to be completely sucked out. He struggled desperately and slapped Lin Yu's arms desperately, but no matter how hard he struggled, it was still to no avail. Lin Yu's expression was indifferent, and the guy suddenly felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At this time, his face finally became more and more ugly. Sir, please forgive me. This time I am willing to atone for my sins, and please spare my life. After Lin Yu saw her like this, the anger in his heart could not be concealed. In just that brief moment, others saw him gradually moving toward that person step by step. Approaching. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu waved a sword energy from his sleeves, and the sword energy surged across the sky, and then he saw a heart-rending roar coming from Huang Mao's mouth. It hurts. After all, Lin Yu didn't have any murderous intentions, but of course he had to make Huang Mao pay a price. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually, and then said in a deep voice, "You are lucky today, and I am in a better mood, so let's forget about it for the time being, but it will not be an exception this time. If you dare to do it again, I don't need to tell you what your end will be like." A trace of gloom flashed across Lin Yu's expression, and then the monstrous aura started from Lin Yu's body and spread quietly. A cold aura lingered, and a bloody the murderous intention is beginning to approach. At this moment, he saw the space-time beast standing there. His face was a little ugly, and his expression was quite indifferent. The group of black energy also stood in place, and the two of them just looked at each other, and no one was in a hurry to take action first. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect that, my dear brother, you would still be alive. This is really something I didn't expect. At this time, Lin Yu said softly, with a hint of indifference flashing across his expression, and a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. At this time, the space beast stared at the black aura with its eyes, and then released its murderous aura without any reservation. The mysterious aura started like this in the sky. Little by little, it gradually gathered. Why? Why did you do that back then? After hearing what the space-time beast said, the black figure seemed to have a slight sneer on his lips, and he just shook his head. Is it possible that you didn't know the reason for this back then? My dear brother, you can't be so stupid. At this time, after the time and space beast heard what the black shadow said, his face instantly became gloomy. He took a step forward quietly, and then let out a hysterical sound from his mouth. Like roaring. Evereld, do you know the vows we made back then? Is it possible that you have forgotten the vows we made back then? At that time, the space beast's eyes widened with anger, and its eyes were fixed on Everald's body. The look on its face was full of panic, and a lingering aura began to spread quietly. After Everald heard what the space-time beast said, the corner of her mouth just curled up with a slight sneer, and then she said in a cold and unhurried voice, "What do you think I should call you now, okay? Anubis? Or as that human calls you, a space-time beast?" There seemed to be a bit of ridicule in Everald's words, and her expression was full of indifference, and the black shadow seemed to be flashing with a bit of anger. Time and Space Beast, after hearing what Everald said, a bit of indifference flashed across his expression, and then a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and there was a clear feeling between his eyebrows. "It's all a mockery. Anubis, I haven't heard this name for a long time. I never expected that I would actually hear you call me that again in my lifetime." At this time, a faint breath slowly floated over from a distance. That faint breath lingered around them, making them feel unpredictable. A moment later, the cold breath began to gradually ravage and invade their bodies. The cold breath forced them to retreat for a long time. The space-time beast never thought that the cold breath on his brother's body, which he had not seen for a long time, had actually cultivated to such a level. On the contrary, he had not practiced for thousands of years and had stopped moving forward. From a distance, Lin Yu saw the two of them like this, and just communicated with the space-time beast secretly, "How is it? Are you sure you can solve this guy in front of you?" The corners of the space-time beast's mouth raised a few faint bitter smiles, and his deep affection was full of helplessness. The corners of his eyes and eyebrows were full of helplessness. "In fact, I don't know what to do this time." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 762. At this time, the space-time beast's whole body was filled with a sense of helplessness. At this moment, he still felt that he really didn't know what he should do. After waiting for this moment, a turbid aura quietly began to flow towards them little by little. The faint aura forced several of them to retreat one after another, their expressions even more complete. "It's a look of pain." After waiting for this moment, the aura of chaos began to gradually spread in the surrounding world. Lin Yu slowly took a step forward, and then came to the front of Everard. Everard looked at such a weak human being who dared to come in front of her, and then her body exploded, with an unprecedented internal pressure pressing directly on Lin Yu's body. Then an angry roar was heard from his mouth. "Stupid human being, today I hope you will give me a reasonable explanation. I hope you can surrender to me. Although my stupid brother has already surrendered to you, I hope you can release that stupid guy." Everard's voice was filled with a strong sense of oppression. After Lin Yu felt this strong sense of oppression, the corner of his mouth only evoked a slight smile, with a look full of mockery, and then he looked down at him directly. "On Everald's body. Interesting, I have never seen a guy as ridiculous as you. You are the first time I have seen such a ridiculous person. Do you think I will surrender to you?" Lin Yu spoke softly like this, and then quietly began to let out his own strong sense of oppression. Even Everald had to admit that the thick, mysterious, and strange sense of oppression on Lin Yu's body was indeed terrifying and terrifying to him. Everard subconsciously took a few steps back, with a slight smile on her lips. Then he saw the mysterious and strange forces quietly climbing into the sky, and then the majestic and vast force condensed on the sky. An extremely huge ice pick hit Lin Yu's head from top to bottom, and Lin Yu felt this terrifying oppression on Everald's body. After feeling it, my heart couldn't help but tremble slightly. What exactly does this mean?" A somewhat indifferent sneer appeared at the corner of Efred's mouth, and the indifferent look in his expression began to become more and more obvious. "Don't you understand this? I just want your little guy's life. You should understand it now." The smile on the corner of Everald's mouth gradually became obvious, and her face began to slowly become more ferocious. After Lin Yu felt the sense of oppression on Everald's body, he was slightly stunned at first. The next second, a powerful flame began to gradually burn from his body. After the time and space beast saw this powerful and mysterious flame, the whole person's expression could not help but gradually become nervous. He subconsciously took a few steps back, and then quickly there was a look of complete helplessness between the eyebrows. You. The corners of Lin Yu's lips twitched into a slight sneer, and then he waved his hand casually. The monstrous aura started from the void and spread quietly, and then the turbid aura little by little it started to gather. The fire Kylin just stepped on Lin Yu's shoulder. At this time, the fire Kylin was on Lin Yu's shoulder, opened its mouth gently, and then spit out a mouthful of flames. The fire unicorn had a strong sense of oppression, forcing the guy to move backwards one after another, and retreat like this crazily. The guy was retreating back, and Lin Yu was moving forward. The two of them were going back and forth. In the end, it seemed that the guy couldn't resist the vast and terrifying power released by Lin Yu. Pressure, so at this moment he couldn't help it anymore. Stand, if you dare to move forward again, believe it or not. At this time, the space-time beast saw his brother, and he was so afraid of the holy fire unicorn, and then the corner of his mouth evoked a faint sneer. It seems that you went to that place after all. If my predictions are correct, you should be seriously injured. No wonder you only dared to call your clone to come here this time. Your body must be healing. The space-time beast said calmly and leisurely. At this time, after Everard heard what the space-time beast said, he couldn't help but clenched his fists, his teeth clenched, and the awe-inspiring murderous aura on his body began to become more and more obvious. Stand up. What do you mean? I can leave my words here today. If you dare to be so arrogant with me again, believe it or not, I will kill you directly. At this time, Everald's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast, and the clear intention to kill in her expression began to gradually spread, calling the space-time beast, and she couldn't help but have it. A feeling of oppression coming from the bones. After sensing his brother's aura, the space-time beast subconsciously took a few steps back, and then immediately looked at his brother from top to bottom, with a faint smile on his lips. Brother, let's not talk about Pang's matter for now, let's talk about it for now. Do you think you can really do this? If you want to kill me, I'm afraid you don't have that ability. The space-time beast said this slowly, with a faint smile on his lips. At this time, Everelder, after hearing what the space-time beast said, his expression couldn't help but flash a little, but at this time, although he was unwilling in his heart, he had no way to do it for a while. Everelder clenched his fists, and then a faint murderous aura began to be released quietly, and the terrifying aura made everyone tremble. Okay, very good, my dear brother, remember how arrogant you are now, so that you won't be able to be arrogant again in the future. Goodbye. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 763. This is the first time in such a long time that Space-Time Beast has seen his brother so frustrated in front of him. After seeing this scene, the Time and Space Beast's face was full of joy. At this time, he turned his head and glanced up and down Lin Yu's body, as if he had gotten some candy. Like a child, the joy on his face is naturally self-evident. Ha ha ha, I never expected that my brother would become like this. To be able to make him so deflated is simply a great joy in life. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on his forehead, and he felt speechless in his heart. Lin Yu was like this at this time, as if he suddenly remembered something. He turned his head towards the space-time beast and looked up and down, and then said in a deep voice, "What's going on? Why is the relationship between you and your brother like this? It's simply unbelievable." Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast, and a bit of confusion could not help but flash through his expression. After waiting for this moment, an extremely strange force began to surge towards them little by little. That force made everyone even feel a little shuddering. They subconsciously took a few steps back, and then their whole bodies began to tremble uncontrollably. At this time, Lin Yu glanced at the space-time beast subconsciously, and then asked in a deep voice, "What's going on? Why is that guy so scary? His power is a bit." Lin Yu paused when he said this. Although he did not continue speaking, the space-time beast also knew what Lin Yu wanted to say. "Don't forget that my brother is the leader of the White Lotus section. It's not surprising that a dignified leader can use so much power," the space-time beast said helplessly, and then he sighed for a long time, and his face was obviously helpless. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his expression was slightly startled at first, and finally he gently touched his chin in the next second. It's strange. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be the case, but now. Those people were not slow to arrive. The space-time beast just pondered for a moment. With the current strength of the two of us, it will be better to escape soon. The space-time beast said lightly like this, and then he also said softly a few times. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he was slightly hesitant at first, but later Lin Yu figured it out. "What you said is absolutely true. I will do as you say in this matter." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he started like this and walked slowly forward. After seeing Lin Yu like this, the space-time beast suddenly felt a bit of a bad premonition in his heart for some reason. At this time, his brows even seemed to be twisted together. Oh, I always feel that this matter is not that simple, but some things are indeed not easy to say. After the space beast thought of this, he shook his head helplessly, smiled softly, and his brows were full of pain. After waiting for a while, a terrifying dark cloud in the distance seemed to be heading towards them, gradually gathering. Lin Yu and the space-time beast looked at each other, and then with a thought, they disappeared in the next second. The space-time beast and Lin Yu flew forward. But not long after they left, someone suddenly appeared in the place where they had been before. After those people arrived here, they couldn't help but stand still and looked furious the next second. "Asshole, where did those damn bastards go?" But even though they were furious at this time, there was nothing they could do, because now the space-time beast had already opened the space-time tunnel and disappeared without a trace. Those people from the White Lotus sect stood there and looked at each other for a moment. They really didn't know how to go about communicating. After waiting for a while, those people looked at each other like this, and then sighed helplessly, with a faint wry smile on the corners of their mouths. "Well, now that they have escaped, there is no other way. We can only stand up and tell the truth. After all, it was already a little late when the king informed us just now." Those people were helpless for a while, because they didn't know much about other people's tempers, but when it came to the temper of the White Lotus throne, they naturally understood it thoroughly. Those people looked at each other, their expressions naturally full of helplessness. After waiting for a while, the vast force began to gradually gather in one place. Almost at that moment, I saw that a mysterious force began to spread bit by bit around here. "Come on." The figure of the White Lotus throne gradually began to reveal itself in front of everyone. If Lin Yu was still there, he would certainly find that the White Lotus throne and the space-time beast were almost carved out of the same mold. After seeing the White Lotus throne, the people of the White Lotus sect knelt down one after another. "Greetings, Your Highness." The White Lotus throne looked around, but could not find any fluctuations in space and time at all. This meant that his brother, who looked very stupid and recognized a human as his master, was now much stronger than himself. At this time, the White Lotus throne was furious. His clenched fists creaked, and the murderous aura on his body began to spread quietly. "Asshole, damn it!" After the White Lotus throne finished speaking, a surge of murderous aura began to be released from his body, and his face began to become much uglier than before, but now he had no way to deal with it for a while. The White Lotus Throne collected his thoughts, and then glanced coldly at everyone. Do you know who else I want to capture besides that human when I asked you to come here today? Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 764. When everyone heard what White Lotus Throne said, they couldn't help but look at each other, and then they shook their heads, forcing a helpless smile from the corners of their mouths. Your Majesty, look at what you said. How can we possibly know who you want to arrest? At this time, the White Lotus Throne's mind could not help but sink slightly, and then he said leisurely, I want to tell you some good news, my stupid brother is back. After everyone heard what the White Lotus Throne said, they couldn't help but look at each other. At this time, their faces began to look a little ugly, and then they glanced at the White Lotus Throne at the same time. What? Your Highness, are you telling the truth? Your Highness is still alive now. Those people looked at each other, their eyes fixed on the White Lotus Throne. There was a look of disbelief in the corners of their eyes and brows. They couldn't believe that what the White Lotus Throne said was actually true. At this time, after hearing what they said, the White Lotus Throne only had a faint smile on its lips. Finally, after looking at them up and down, it nodded gently. Yes, my stupid brother has indeed come back. What? What do you think? Of course, those people can understand that the White Lotus Throne seems to be in a bad mood at this time. If they provoke the White Lotus Throne again now, they may not be able to survive. So at this time, they looked at each other like this, and then they shook their heads and smiled. It's nothing, no matter who comes, now for us, if the king clicks on you, it will be our world, and no one can topple this day. At this time, those people's eyes were fixed on me, the White Lotus Throne, and then they said in a deep voice. Seeing how sensible they were, White Lotus Throne naturally had a faint smile on his lips. What you said is good, but I still hope that you'd better remember what you said, and you'd better not play with me when the time comes. If you don't, I think what will happen to you when the time comes. You should know better. At this moment, White Lotus Throne's expression was full of gloom, and the indifferent murderous aura on his body began to quietly condense together. At that moment, the cold breath made everyone's bodies begin to feel even more, and gradually started to tremble involuntarily. A mysterious feeling made everyone's minds freeze almost at that moment. Those people suddenly became aware of the awe-inspiring pressure carried by the White Lotus Throne. At this time, they began to realize that the White Lotus Throne in front of them seemed to be a bit stronger than before, which meant that the White Lotus Throne seemed to be about to break through. After the God's level beasts break through, they will reach the level of God Kings. Once they reach the realm of God Kings, they will truly be the kings of their side. The God Kings will expand their territory and have their own exclusive space. In that exclusive space it's like hearing it. Almost immediately after everyone felt the terrifying pressure from the White Lotus Throne, their faces began to turn ugly. Their expressions were all one of disbelief. A monstrous murderous intent began to gradually spread out at that moment. The surging murderous intent made everyone's minds freeze. Then he saw a monstrous momentum, which began to spread quietly from the sky, and then immediately froze one of them into a popsicle. After everyone saw this scene, they couldn't help but feel a faint sense of fear in their hearts. At this time, they had no idea why that person was directly executed by their lord on the throne. At this time, the White Lotus Throne began to explain unhurriedly. I guess you must be curious about why I killed that guy. In fact, there was no other reason, but it was just because the guy had just wavered. I remember I said it before, once everyone chooses to follow me, if he dares to rebel midway, he will definitely die. In fact, it's just because that guy is really unlucky. That guy didn't rebel against the White Lotus Throne. I just thought that the White Lotus Throne urgently needed to scare the monkeys to scare them, So I pulled out the unlucky guy like this. If that person knew everything and it was for this reason that he was killed behind the White Lotus throne, I'm afraid he would be angry even if he died. Lin Yu looked around, and then he saw a dense forest. Looking at the forest in front of him, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Where are we now? Lin Yu spoke softly like this, with a bit of confusion flashing across his expression, and a bit of confusion flashing between his brows. At this moment, the space-time beast rolled his eyes at Lin Yu angrily, and then said calmly, "This is the destination of your trip, Baiko Forest." After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he was also slightly stunned at first, and then his expression became happy. The joy on his face was beyond words. Then he came to the space-time beast and looked at the space-time beast up and down. The faint smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "Ha ha ha, I didn't expect it to be here." After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast couldn't help but condense a little, and then said to Lin Yu with a serious face, "I just spent a lot of effort to finally lead us away. From now on, there is no need to be weak. It's better for us not to expose my position." After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he thought of his perverted brother again. That guy can indeed be seen to be a little moody. After thinking of this, Lin Yu immediately glanced at the space-time beast, and then said in a deep voice, "What's the matter with your brother?" Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 765. After hearing Lin Yu's question, the space-time beast's face couldn't help but become a little ugly. After a while, the space-time beast seemed to remember something, and after glancing up and down at Lin Yu, he said calmly, "Our top priority right now is to leave here quickly, because I have a feeling that they will probably catch up here in no time." After Lin Yu heard the space-time beast say this, his face couldn't help but become a little ugly, and then he looked up and down at the space-time beast, and then said in a deep voice, "What do you mean by this? Didn't you say that you have erased all the traces you left behind? But what's the matter with this statement now?" Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast, and then he said in a cold voice, with a few puzzled expressions flashing across his face, and a kind of confusion between his eyebrows. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast just pondered for a while, and then said leisurely, "Since we are brothers from the same mother, you should also know that he also has my talent, so." The space-time beast paused at this point and stopped talking, but Lin Yu also understood what Kong Xiao wanted to say to him. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's expression flashed a rare solemnity. "If it is really as you said, then this time it is really a bit tricky. It seems that we need to think of a way." When Lin Yu thought of this, his brows were instantly twisted together, and his face couldn't help but suddenly sank. "But we have to get that thing first." Lin Yu turned his head to Kong Xiao, just glanced up and down, and then said softly. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast pondered for a long time, and then said lightly, "What you said is indeed true. Now we really have to do it as you said." The two people have made up their minds this time. At this moment, they just heard a few men and women walking over from a distance, talking and laughing. Those people were wearing uniform clothes and looked like disciples of a certain academy. The space-time beast and Lin Yu looked at each other, and there was a bit of confusion in their expressions. They couldn't figure out why these men and women came here. At this time, the space-time beast whispered in Lin Yu's ear, "If I'm not wrong, they should all be disciples of Atlantis Academy. This Atlantis Academy should be the only one on this continent that can compete with Bailian. If we follow them to Atlantis Academy, maybe there is still a glimmer of hope." At this time, the space-time beast whispered in Lin Yu's ear. After hearing what the space-time beast said, Lin Yu's indifferent smile became more and more obvious. He just nodded lightly, "Okay, in this case, let's go to Atlantis Academy with them according to what you said. Don't think this matter is so simple." It is almost impossible for ordinary people to enter Atlantis Academy, so I advise you to think it over carefully first. The space-time beast said in a deep voice at this time. After hearing what the space-time beast said, Lin Yu's expression flashed a little indifference, and then the corners of his mouth even raised a few faint smiles. No problem, Atlantis Academy, you should be able to enter. Lin Yu said leisurely, and the corners of his mouth even raised a few faint smiles. After a while, those people walked towards Lin Yu. Among these people, there was a woman wearing a college uniform, with a white complexion and eyes like sapphires. She looked indifferent, but these men were chattering around her. The woman's expression was cold, as if she was a fairy above the nine heavens' mysterious dust, and she would not tolerate any infringement from others. After seeing this woman, Lin Yu was shocked for a moment, and the woman also glanced at Lin Yu with a deep meaning. At this time, one of the men seemed to have seen Lin Yu and his junior sister. The look between the two of them was unknown. The man just walked straight towards Lin Yu, and then looked down at Lin Yu with a condescending attitude. "Boy, who do you think you are? How dare you have such a delusional behavior towards my junior sister? I advise you to take a piss and look at yourself, so as not to humiliate yourself." The man looked very arrogant at this time, his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then he said so coldly. After hearing what the man said, Lin Yu just raised a few cold smiles at the corners of his mouth, and then glanced up and down at the man. "Really? You are really a bit ridiculous. So stupid." At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually, and then wanted to turn around and leave. At this time, the man saw Lin Yu and wanted to turn around and leave. Without saying a word, he stood in front of Lin Yu, and then his eyes were wide open, staring at Lin Yu. "What do you mean by this? Explain it to me if you can." Lin Yu pushed the man away with a palm, and then walked past him. "It's meaningless, and there's no need to explain it clearly. Anyway, you are shit in my eyes, why should I waste my time to care about you?" After saying this, Lin Yu turned around and left, and then a cold smile appeared on his face. He didn't look at the man more during the whole process. And just after this moment, a cold air was released from behind Lin Yu. There was a bit of ice in that breath. At this time, Lin Yu just thought that the man was a little ridiculous, but at this time, the man's behavior just angered him, so he was ready to punish him. At this time, Lin Yu just snapped his fingers lightly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 766. At this moment, the ice-cold wings came towards Lin Yu and wrapped them up wantonly. In just an instant, they completely wrapped up the rain. When the man saw Lin Yu, he was subdued by him so easily. After that, even Shang Xiren was completely overjoyed. When he looked at Lin Yu, his expression showed a bit of contempt. "Ha ha ha, I originally thought I had some ability, but now it looks like nothing more than that, just such a waste. Now I really don't understand how I have the nerve to be so arrogant." At this time, Qin Xiu said coldly. At this time, a faint flame started from Lin Yu's body and gradually spread, and then he saw that almost at that moment, the ice cube that was freezing Lin Yu shattered. One fell into pieces and fell apart. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu's figure slowly emerged. At this moment, Lin Yu just stared at Qin Xiu with a smile on his face, facing Qin Xiu. After looking him up and down, a hint of indifference flashed through his affection. Lin Yu looked at Qin Xiu with a faint smile on his lips, and then he approached Qin Xiu step by step. After Qin Xiu saw this scene, a layer of dense cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and then he subconsciously took a few steps back, his expression full of disbelief. How is this possible? That is my source of ice. How can you possibly break my source of ice? This is absolutely impossible. At this time, Lin Yu slowly approached Qin Qiu step by step. The corners of his mouth evoked a somewhat indifferent sneer, and a hint of coldness flashed through him. The murderous aura gradually began to spread. I think I just said that I don't seem to be interested in you, but you just don't know what's going on. Why do you have to come to trouble me? The indifferent murderous intention in Lin Yu spread quietly at that moment. Qin Qiu turned around and glanced at his so-called companions as if asking for help, and then his voice even trembled slightly. Help me quickly, this guy is too scary. But those people were just preparing to watch a good show, and had no intention of helping that guy at all. They just glanced up and down in that direction, and the indifferent sneers at the corners of their mouth seemed to attract their attention at this time. Indifferent. But at this moment, although the others still looked cold and indifferent, Lingyu couldn't help it anymore, and she took a step forward. Let's just forget about this matter. Even though there was something wrong with him just now, of course it didn't cause any harm to you after all, so let him go this time. At this moment, the remaining men saw Lingyu and started to speak for Qin Qiu, so they turned their heads and looked at Lin Yu. Yeah, anyway, nothing happened to you, brother. It's better to just let this matter go. Why are you so aggressive? At this time, after Lin Yu heard what they said, he suddenly smiled. The sneer at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. He looked at them as if he was looking at this idiot. Ha ha ha, interesting, it's really interesting. Why were you so indifferent when that guy attacked me just now, but now when this guy is about to be dealt with by me, you are here to persuade me. The corner of Lin Yu's mouth only curled up into a sneer, and a hint of indifference flashed through his affection. His eyes were fixed on Lingyu in front of him, his expression suddenly turned cold, and a trace of indifference emerged from his body. A leisurely murderous intention. Lingyu only saw endless anger in Lin Yu's eyes, attacking towards him. At this time, Lin Yu even felt like he was drifting like a lonely boat in the sea. Lingyu moved forward one after another, and after taking several steps back, he managed to stabilize his figure. What do you mean? Do you have to be stubborn? Do you know that if you insist on going your own way, you will have to pay the price? Lingyu's voice even started to sound a little hoarse. After subconsciously taking a few steps back, he managed to stabilize his body and looked at Lin Yu, his expression full of excitement. A touch of fear. At this time, Lin Yu had arrived in front of Lingyu without knowing it, and then he gently lifted Lingyu's chin, and a faint smile flashed at the corner of his mouth. Pay the price? I'm really curious, what price are you going to make me pay? A trace of indifference flashed across Lin Yu's expression, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious, and he gradually approached Lingyu step by step. At this time, the few people around Lingyu couldn't help it anymore, because this was an excellent opportunity for a hero to save the beauty. Moreover, although Qin Qiu seemed to be not weak, after all, they were burdened with the powers of the peak of the Chaos Realm. Beast, I am afraid that if it really fights with Lin Yu, it will not be without the strength to fight. At this moment, everyone's eyes were full of strangeness, and then their expressions were full of indifference. They gradually approached Lin Yu. Those people's footsteps revealed a firm step, and then they gradually approached Lin Yu little by little. After a moment, a lingering power above began to spread quietly, and the minds of all the people in that power could not help but tremble slightly at that moment. After a moment, Lin Yu saw that everyone's body, at the same time, merged into an extremely powerful and violent power. At this time, Lin Yu gently stroked his chin, and then half closed his eyes. Strange, why is it like this? Why is the power around so pure? This is a bit strange. At this moment, Lin Yu's whole expression could not help but freeze. Survival of the beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 767. At this moment, the clouds were completely released at that moment, and then the clouds merged together completely at that moment, and began to gradually spread towards Lin Yu. The clouds that came over enveloped Lin Yu wantonly. When Lin Yu felt the gloomy clouds, his whole face couldn't help but feel calm in the next second. He moved backwards one after another, and after taking nearly 3 steps back, he barely managed to stabilize his body. Shape. Time and space beast, do you know the reason for this? After hearing what Lin Yu said at this moment in time and space, he pondered for a moment, and then coughed lightly the next second. There was a bit of helplessness between his eyebrows, and a few words at the corners of his mouth. The bitter smile became even more obvious. If my prediction is correct, I am afraid that the talents of these students are somewhat extraordinary. Perhaps the most terrifying thing about the talents of these students is their control of spiritual power. The spiritual power these people use, all power is the original energy, so. Time and Space Beast said, and it stopped immediately. Even if Time and Space Beast stopped talking, Lin Yu also understood what Gong Xiao wanted to say. At this moment, he was rubbing it gently like this. He lifted his chin, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of playfulness flashed across his face. So that's it? It turns out that all these people are using this original energy. This is really something I didn't expect. After a while, a calm aura rose into the sky in the distance. The aura gradually spread in all directions, and then a calm aura was seen exuding from Lin Yu's body. A breath of indifference forced everyone to move back one after another and retreat crazily. Lin Yu just took a step forward unhurriedly, and then cast a casual glance at the front in a condescending manner. Although your talents are good, in my opinion, they are still a bit lacking. There is no need to say more today. What else do you have to say? After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward, and then a violent murderous aura spread from his body almost completely at that moment. It was almost an air of indifference that rose into the sky, and then he saw one of them towering over the void, looking towards the front, just casually glancing at it, and then there was something strange in the expression of the whole person. There was a hint of gloominess. Interesting, it's really interesting. I didn't expect that I would find you again. But today, are you ready to accept my anger? In the distance in the void, a faint aura rushed towards them, and that faint aura completely enveloped them almost at that moment. In just a moment, a stream of turbid auras started from the void and spread out quietly. After a moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of everyone. That person was condescending, and his whole expression was full of indifference. At this moment, Lin Yu and the space-time beast also felt the aura of the White Lotus throne, and then they suddenly looked up and down towards the White Lotus throne. Their faces and the door were filled with a kind of coldness. You are really haunted. I didn't expect that you would be chasing me here again now. At this time, their eyes were wide open, staring at the injured person in the void, clenching their fists, their teeth clenching, and the fierce murderous aura on their bodies was gradually increasing like this. Spread. A powerful and vast Genkai almost instantly forced everyone to retreat crazily towards the back. At this time, after the disciples of the Atlantis Academy felt the aura of the White Lotus Kingzo, they couldn't help but look at each other, and then they were all shocked and dumbfounded. They were staring at them in front of them. The White Lotus throne standing in the sky. This guy is actually the White Lotus throne. I didn't expect that he would actually appear here. At this time, Qin Qiu moved forward and took several steps back. The men also wanted to retreat. Ling Yu, leave quickly. This White Lotus throne is cruel by nature. If Tang is caught by him, I'm afraid he will definitely die this time. At this time, the man's voice even trembled slightly, and when he looked at Ye Lingyu's expression, a hint of worry flashed through him. At this time, Ye Lingyu just snorted after hearing what the man said. Yes, Lingyu, please listen to my advice and run away now, otherwise it will be bad by then. At this time, the White Lotus throne seemed to have noticed Ye Lingyu in the distance. At this time, the White Ling throne looked up and down at Ye Lingyu casually, and then the corners of its mouth evoked a hint of faintness. His smile was full of disdain. I didn't expect it, I didn't expect it, I didn't expect that there would be an extra bonus here today. It was actually a throne-level student from Atlantis. This really makes me unbelievable. I didn't expect that my luck today would be so unexpected. It will be so good. At this time, the men saw the White Lotus throne and noticed Ye Lingyu. They didn't care about Ye Lingyu at this moment, so they ran away immediately. Those people were not slow. In a short while, they had already fled from the White Lotus throne. Naturally, they would not lose Lingyu and Ye Lingyu because of those trash, so they naturally ignored them. At this time, Ye Lingyu's face was a little pale. After all, the pressure emanating from the White Lotus throne was naturally not something that a student of his level could withstand. However, at this time, Ye Lingyu's expression flashed a little gloomy, and then he slowly stepped up and gradually approached the White Lotus throne. White Lotus throne, I admit that your strength is indeed not weak, but I think you'd better think clearly about a throne-level student. If you dare to really kill me, the elders in the academy will definitely fight you to death. I just hope you can withstand their anger. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 768. At this time, the White Lotus throne saw that Ye Lingyu looked completely confident. At this time, he didn't know why after seeing the smile on the face of the woman in front of him, he suddenly felt a little bit more angry. He gradually approached Ye Lingyu step by step, and then the corner of his mouth evoked a somewhat indifferent sneer. At this time, he saw the White Lotus throne, and his whole expression was full of gloom. Ye Lingyu, even I have to admit that you, little girl, are really capable, but so what? I leave my words here today. If I kill you, those people behind you will proud old guy, no one dares to trouble me, whether you believe it or not. The whole person on the White Lotus throne looked down at Ye Lingyu with a gloomy expression. In fact, Lingyu didn't like the girl in front of him at all, but he still couldn't bear to see the White Lotus throne being so aggressive. So at this time, Lingyu didn't say anything, and took a step forward with a single lunge, showing a bit of murderous aura on his body. What? I didn't expect that a dignified White Lotus throne would now bully a female class. This is really something I didn't expect. At this time, Lingyu stared at the White Lotus throne with a smile on his face, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. After hearing what Lingyu said, the White Lotus throne couldn't help but get furious. A faint murderous aura emerged from his body, and that murderous aura began to spread throughout the small world at this time. At this time, Lingyu seemed to be able to feel the natural murderous intention in the White Lotus throne, so he couldn't help but feel a little solemn at this time. Interesting, the murderous intent is not weak, but the murderous intent is still a bit weak. It seems that I really want to play with you this time. The smile on Lingyu's face began to become brighter and brighter. For some reason, after White Lotus throne saw the rain at this moment, he suddenly felt a bit of an ominous premonition in his heart. He always felt that Lingyu seemed to have some conspiracy. The White Lotus throne's eyes widened with anger, and his expression was filled with blood-colored murderous intent. Boy, I advise you to be more honest. If not, I will make you look good. At this time, the air between the two people seemed to be frozen, and what Ye Lingyu never expected was the oppressive feeling on Lingyu's body when she stood in front of her. It actually weakened a bit. Ye Lingyu turned his head and stared directly at Lingyu. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little bit of confusion in his mind. At this moment, Ye Lingyu was thinking, what kind of identity is this man? Why does this man have such tyrannical strength now? What is going on? After all, someone who can challenge the White Lotus throne is obviously not a good person. At this time, the space-time beast also jumped out directly. White Lotus throne, after feeling the breath of the space-time beast, then smiled like this, "My dear brother, I didn't expect that you would finally be willing to show up, but you don't know how much your brother misses you." After the time and space beast heard what the White Lotus throne said, a faint gloomy look flashed across his expression. Then, after waiting for the next second, he just glanced up and down towards the White Lotus throne. Then he said coldly, "I really don't need you to worry about me, and you don't want to think about it. Who are you?" At this time, the eyes of the space-time beast were staring at the White Lotus throne. At this time, Ye Lingyu, who was watching the battle between the two sides from a distance, could not help but start to freeze after hearing the conversation between the two. Ye Lingyu stared straight at the person in front of him, his expression full of disbelief. "What is your identity? The younger brother of the White Lotus throne? Are you true or false?" After Lin Yu heard what Ye Lingyu said, he didn't know how to explain the matter to this little girl. He just waved his hand casually, and then laughed softly. "This matter is difficult to explain in words. There is nothing I can do for now to tell you the reason, but you will know the reason sooner or later." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he turned around and smiled casually towards Ye Lingyu, his expression a little more playful. After Ye Lingyu heard what Lin Yu said, he really didn't know what kind of medicine Lin Yu was selling in this gourd. But for now, Ye Lingyu was certain of one thing, that was, Lin Yu's identity was absolutely extraordinary and definitely not something he could easily touch. Ye Lingyu gently rubbed his chin, and then looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. At this moment, Lin Yu saw Ye Lingyu. After this appearance, his scalp felt numb. Looking at this Xiaona's eyes couldn't help but look a little strange. At this moment, the space-time beast transformer secretly sent a message to Lin Yu. "Now that my brother's true form is coming, with my current strength, it would still take some effort to fight with my brother Vidi, so as far as I can see, let's run away as soon as possible. Otherwise, if it were a little slower, I'm afraid." At this time, Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, a faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "But we haven't gotten that single herb from the 100 Herbs forest yet. If we escape now, I'm afraid we don't know when we will be able to get the herb to treat Bai Binjaiu." After hearing Lin Yu's words, the time and space beast just coughed slightly, then glanced up and down towards the Baiko forest, and then said in a deep voice, "Now, as long as I enter the Baiko forest, I have a way to escape. My brother, the magnetic field in the Baiko forest is abnormally disordered, and any beast that enters it will lose its way, but fortunately it's a human being, so it shouldn't matter much." The space-time beast just spoke softly and unhurriedly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 769. The White Lotus throne looked up and down at the space-time beast, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Then he waved his hand gently, and then he said in a cold voice, "I know you want to enter the 100 Grass Forest to get rid of me, but you have to think it over. If you enter the 100 Grass Forest in our mountainous area, you will lose your way, and you will die." As the White Lotus throne said this, he suddenly released a stream of icy air from his palm. The icy air was not directed at the space-time beast, but at the natural aura coming towards Lin Yu and Ye Lingyu. It carried an incomparable sense of oppression, forcing the two of them to even step back several steps in succession at that moment. After a while, a faint breath began to spread quietly from the void. Lin Yu and Ye Lingyu seemed to be able to feel the terrifying breath that was born naturally. After a while, a mysterious breath condensed in the air and lingered among all things. The extremely cold air seemed to want to freeze them to death. Even though they were far away, Lin Yu and Ye Lingyu had already felt the surging cold air. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu and Ye Lingyu looked at each other. Oh no, the time-space beast may not be able to react in time. Now I'm afraid I can only use you. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he summoned the fire Kirin. At this moment, after feeling the natural pressure from the fire Kirin, Ye Lingyu's calm face could no longer hold back. Ye Lingyu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then her whole expression was full of disbelief. She simply couldn't believe that all this was true. At this moment, Ye Lingyu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. You, how many of these strange beasts do you have? Who are you? Ye Lingyu's voice was even trembling slightly, and her words were full of respect. After hearing what Ye Lingyu said, Lin Yu turned around and looked at Ye Lingyu up and down. A faint smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, and then she said leisurely, "It's enough to ensure the safety of both of us." After Lin Yu finished speaking, she began to control the fire Kirin. A stream of Kirin true fire spurted out of the fire Kirin's mouth. At this time, Lin Yu saw that the Kirin true fire was instantly extinguished by the coldness. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu pondered for a moment, and his whole face froze. At this time, he took a deep breath. Oh no, it seems that it is not enough. At this time, Lin Yu bit his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. He used his spiritual power to pull, and then immediately drew an extremely mysterious and obscure magic circle in the void. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to be crazy and threw the fire unicorn in his hand out. The moment the fire unicorn was thrown out by Lin Yu, it seemed that there were 10,000 grass mud horses galloping through his heart. At this time, when the fire unicorn passed through the suspended magic circle, a turbid breath instantly began to spread from the fire unicorn's body. A faint true energy made everyone's mind even start to tremble slightly. A lingering breath began to spread quietly from the body of the fire Kirin. Waiting for the next second, the fire Kirin's body actually began to grow little by little, and finally it grew into a 10,000-foot momentum against the wind. The fire Kirin was extremely tall, and at this time, his hooves were stepping gently. At this moment, when he was the White Lotus throne, after seeing the fire Kirin at this moment, his eyes were full of disbelief. He couldn't believe what he saw at all. At this time, he was stunned. At this time, the fire Kirin spewed out a flame from its mouth, and the flame directly broke through the cold air and gathered madly on the body of the White Lotus throne. The White Lotus throne could only quickly withdraw and dodge. After seeing this scene, the space-time beast quickly came to Lin Yu's side, using countless small spaces to move around, and in an instant it had already sunk into the Baiko forest. At this moment, Ye Lingyu had been held in Lin Yu's arms without knowing when. At first, Ye Lingyu didn't even notice anything wrong, but later, 2 blushes appeared on her pretty face. About a quarter of an hour later, Lin Yu, the space-time beast, and Ye Lingyu had already lost track of how far they had run, and they immediately found a place to rest. At this moment, the space-time beast was panting heavily. Lin Yu turned around and looked around at the space-time beast. "Your brother is still haunting me. I don't know what he's thinking." The space-time beast rolled his eyes, and then said helplessly, "How do I know what he is thinking? This guy has always been confusing." After waiting for a while, a turbid aura began and gradually spread, and then Lin Yu and the time and space beast heard a roaring sound not far away. The roaring sound made the two of them even tremble. Ye Lingyu felt that after she was held in the arms of a man, 2 touches of crimson appeared on her pretty face. At this moment, she didn't know what to do, so she could only cough lightly. At this time, Lin Yu came to his senses in an instant after hearing Ye Lingyu's cough. Then he turned his head, glanced at Ye Lingyu, scratched his head, and then did the same thing. Smile slightly. There was something abrupt just now. "Please don't blame me," Girl. Yeah, Lin Yu just smiled after hearing what Lin Yu said. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 770. At this time, after Ye Lingyu heard what Lin Yu said, he just coughed slightly and then smiled. It's nothing. I have to thank you for saving me just now. If it weren't for you just now, I'm afraid I would have died in the hands of that guy. At this time, the two of them could be regarded as meeting each other and letting go of their grudges. At this time, the time and space beast on the side saw Lin Yu and the girl were so close, and the corners of his mouth naturally evoked a faint smile. After Lin Yu saw the time and space beast smiling like this, he was also annoyed and glared at the time and space beast fiercely. Now, hurry up and find a way out. If you can't find a way out, I'm afraid that big guy will find out soon that he is really planning to attack us. By then, we won't have anywhere to escape even if we want to. At this moment, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the time and space beast just pondered for a moment, and then said leisurely, "Don't be anxious, in this 100-grass forest, there are powerful beasts everywhere, my brother can't wait for a while. Don't dare to chase me in now, as long as you don't dare to chase me in, that's the best." At this time, Lin Yu's expression couldn't help but a trace of complexity flashed across his face. Finally, he took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. A hint of indifference. It's better to be careful. I don't know why, but I always feel uneasy. Lin Yu said in a deep voice. He glanced at the side subconsciously, a bit of confusion flashed across his expression, but nothing happened around him. After waiting for a while, a leisurely and vast aura arose spontaneously, and came directly towards them, forcing several of them to move behind them one after another, so crazy. Withdrew. After waiting for a while, a figure began to walk out slowly. The figure's expression was somewhat indifferent, and a gloomy aura began to appear from his body quietly, little by little. Released. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu just took a deep breath, and then saw him calm down his mood slightly. The person who came here looked quite majestic, and the eyes he looked at Lin Yu were filled with a kind of coldness. He gradually approached Lin Yu little by little, pulling Lin Yu away. He was so forced that he couldn't help but take a few steps back before he stabilized his figure. Who are you? Ha ha ha, you don't need to take care of the fact that I am the river god, but you only need to remember one thing and that will be fine. The man's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and Lin Yu couldn't help but feel a slight tingling in his scalp. At this time, Lin Yu subconsciously took a few steps back, looking at the guy with an expression of complete indifference. If you have anything to do, I advise you that it's better to explain it clearly now. If not, you will definitely die today, I said so. A hint of murderous intent emerged from Lin Yu's body, and then he gradually approached the man step by step. After seeing Lin Yu like this, the man only had a slight sneer at the corner of his mouth, and then slowly walked towards Lin Yu step by step. He had a strong sense of oppression. Boy, I came today just to kill you, but after seeing how stupid and cowardly you are now, I suddenly don't want to kill you anymore. At this time, the man was approaching Lin Yu step by step. He slowly walked towards Lin Yu and walked over unhurriedly. The faint smile at the corner of his mouth became even more, it's obvious. At this time, Lin Yu just felt that this man was a little strange. His expression flashed with a hint of gloominess in his indifferent expression, and it began to become more and more obvious. Who are you? And why are you doing this? Lin Yu's voice seemed a little hoarse, and the gloominess in his expression was even more obvious. But at this moment, the man suddenly jumped up, and then came to Lin Yu without saying a word, and then rushed towards Lin Yu like this crazily. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he held his breath and concentrated. At this time, without saying a word, he suddenly came behind the man and used the power of the space-time beast to suppress the man severely. After the man was suppressed by Lin Yu, his expression began to look ugly almost at that moment. At this time, the man moved towards the back crazily, taking several steps back in succession. After the man felt the power emanating from Lin Yu's space-time beast, his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, his expression full of disbelief. How is it possible? How could you possess such terrifying and terrible power? This is absolutely impossible. The man's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then he spoke almost as if he was gritting his teeth. At this time, the space-time beast seemed to feel the presence of that person, so without saying anything, the other person just appeared in front of that person with a thought. When the man felt the power contained in the space-time beast, his whole expression was full of disbelief. At this time, he stepped back several steps before he stabilized his body. He looked at the space-time beast with a look of disbelief. How is it possible? How can you still be alive? The space-time beast slowly approached the guy, step by step. At this time, the space-time beast had a faint smile on his lips. When he looked at the man, he naturally had a little more indifference. The faint murderous aura on his body began to spread quietly. Why can't I live? What I didn't expect was that I could meet you here today. This really surprised me. The space-time beast approached the guy step by step, and the smile on his face began to become more and more obvious.